I could, I could, do my hair and put a tie-dye shirt on and look the part, but this has nothing to do with what I look like. Honestly, this is just some spiritual fucking knowledge, some spiritual shit that I have learned over the years and that I have been observing. So a few friends that I've met on YouTube, right? Uh, I hear them talking about, there was like this new age spiritual movement. I hear everyone, and then I started hearing everyone talk about this new age spiritual movement. And for the longest time, like, I thought the new age spiritual movement was like people like me. People like, honestly, like my friend Samina, from, Quantum Kitty. Uh, Honestly, like psychonauts, I don't know. People like Sleepy E. People like The Awakened Brave, people like uh, TJ Travis, people like I was thinking that's the new age, spiritual movement up and coming. No, that was more of an underground psychedelic movement, that's coming up, right? There's like 3 or 4 different types of spiritual communities inside of YouTube. And the psychedelic, underground one is one of them. And because in the psychedelic communities, there's almost 2 types of psychedelic YouTubers. There are psychedelic YouTubers that are basically strictly making YouTube videos for harm reduction, for education, and that aspect of things. Test your substances, like do all that. And then there's the other side of the psychedelic YouTubers that are psychonauts, deep divers, explorers. People that want to explore the psychedelic realm and explain to their best ability their experiences. Let me get a drink of water real quick. But I think, before I get into that, there's also this other side of the spiritual community, because the psychedelic community is in the spiritual community. We could have almost the whole community is labeled under spiritual, but spiritual would have a bunch of brackets under it, and then you have the underground psychedelic community, which is like, YouTubers that are not ginormous, like under 20,000 subscribers, you know what I mean? But, and some of these YouTubers only have 100 subscribers, you know what I mean? But these people are like psychonauts, people that are deep divers, but then they're, like I said, they're the harm reduction people, and they're not necessarily deep divers. They're just, kind of trying to document and try, honestly, to be completely honest, more worried about the views, because I don't give a damn about views. I don't give a shit. I'm not going to do clickbaity shit. If I come up with a dope title off the top of my head, I'll come up with a dope title, but if not, usually the video is named something I say in the video. But there's a lot of YouTubers like that just want to get their information out. They had these psychedelic experiences and they want to explain it to others. So they just want to get it out. And it's just, sometimes it doesn't matter how rambled it sounds, because the psychedelic experience itself is so chaotic. Sometimes when you're trying to explain it, it sounds chaotic. It sounds a little bit scrambled, because the psychedelic experience is scrambled. But but then there's this other side of the spiritual, on another bracket, which would be religious. There's religion, or the religious channels, YouTube channels, Christian YouTube channels, Buddhist YouTube channels, Hindu YouTube channels, Islam YouTube channels. There are a bunch of different types of, spiritual community. Now, the one main one that I see is the Christian one, the religion one where, they kind of talk about the Bible. There's even younger people, which under that category you can actually put a new age religious group, because new age religious people have a little more open-mindedness than the old type of religious people. Just because younger people in general, in our generation now, like young people in my generation, because I'm 25 years old, so young people in my generation, we have a little more of an open mind, but I feel like there's also this spiritual community, right, which there's a bunch of spiritual YouTubers, and these are the spiritual YouTubers that most people know. And there are a lot that most people don't know, but still, the spiritual YouTubers that talk about spirituality, but they don't necessarily say where it comes from. So what I've noticed, right? So the psychedelic community, so on that bracket, obviously you know where they got their knowledge from. Psychedelics. They're not hiding where the knowledge came from. They're saying, no, I am on a spiritual path with the use of, shamanic tools like psychedelics and other plant medicines. Now, there's also the religious community that openly admits that we get our religion from this Bible. This Bible is our thing, right? And there's a lot of controversy of where the Bible, got their information from, but doesn't really matter, because at least the Christian community is saying, no, this is where we get our information from, and this is why I'm explaining it to you. Where, the psychedelic, people say, well, we just have direct contact, and that's why, and then we talk about it. And then you have the spiritual community that a lot of these spiritual YouTubers, and I'm not making this video to talk shit, I'm not making this video to whatever, I'm just making this to be real, because this is just an observation that I've seen. And my observation is that this is just me observing. I'm just very observant. I'm observing the reality I'm living in, and this is what I'm observing through my little phone and on my screens through YouTube, is that I hear a lot of people talk about fifth dimensional knowledge, or accessing a fourth dimensional way of thinking, or accessing a fifth dimensional way of thinking. My question always is with people like that, it's like, well, where do you get the knowledge from? A lot of people talk about spiritual knowledge. See, that's the only thing it's not that I don't like it, it's just, and I don't have any bad blood towards any human being on this planet, but it's just, it slightly grinds my gears when people hear you could have spoke the most amazing, influential, correct knowledge, but I'll be sitting there questioning, where do you get it from? You don't mention it. You don't mention. There's so many people that talk about spiritual knowledge. They talk about all the spiritual things they know. This fifth dimensional, the fourth dimensional, the this, the that. But where do you get these terms from? Why are you using these terms? Where do they come from? Because there are some people in the spiritual community that say they don't use psychedelics. So I'm confused on where you got these ideas from. People say they're a light worker. What do you mean? Like, there's a lot of people who say they're light workers. And I'm always like, well, what do you mean by a light worker? We're all, like, do you mean that you are not a physical human being, that your soul is made of light, and that you will die and become a light being in another dimension? Like, because that's what I mean. I fall into the psychedelic category over there, because all the spiritual things that I believe, I personally experienced with psychedelics. Like, I'm going to make a video about where I generally believe, where I'm going to go when I die. Like, this is what I personally believe, from my personal experiences. It's just, I've had a lot of DMT experiences, and they've made me look at spirituality, life, and death in a certain way. I've heard spiritual, people say that the fourth dimensional and fifth dimensional language that they're speaking, when they use those terms, they say that they don't literally mean a literal dimension, that they don't literally mean a place, that the fourth dimensional thing, it's a way of thinking. My issue is that fourth dimensional thinking, so now they're calling it fourth dimensional thinking, and they're possibly not saying, or possibly don't even know, that there are psychedelic YouTubers, or fuck YouTube, there are psychedelic individuals. There are fucking thousands of people who are traveling dimensions with the use of psychedelics. Literal dimensions, not metaphorical, not a way of thinking, a fucking place. a place that exists, that's a plane, it's another reality with beings that exist there, with other conscious entities, humanoid beings, like this. Now that's the whole psychedelic side. That's the side everyone's scared of, but yet everyone's talking about it. The Christians will say the same thing. The Christians will say, that they have their book, and those people in the book had spiritual experiences, so they followed their spiritual experiences. It's just, I don't know. I just see this whole weird divide. It's weird. Because I don't know, talking to friends about, like, if I talk to a friend about the spiritual, community, it's like, because they're not involved in YouTube like that, they don't understand that there's different types of psychedelic YouTubers. They think all psychedelic YouTubers are like A, when some are like B and C. They don't, I don't know. And then there's all this information going around, all this false information. So much false information just being spread throughout the internet. And I feel like it's because a lot of people are possibly just repeating what they're hearing. And that's my main issue when somebody is speaking, giving knowledge, but not saying where they get this knowledge at all. They're not explaining why you use the terms you use and why, because you want to know, I use fourth dimensional and fifth dimensional. Like I say, we are fifth dimension. Like, this is something I said in the past video. We are fifth dimensional beings living in a third dimensional world. And I don't mean like any way of thinking. I mean, we are fucking light being, interdimensional beings that are made of light, that are in a physical body, like a caterpillar goes into a cocoon. And this body is just a cocoon for our light body, that our light body will eventually be born once we die. And once we die, our light body can exist in the fifth dimension, a literal place, not a way of thinking. Now, my main issue with all of this, right, is it is a way of thinking. They are half right. They are right. When people are talking about a fourth dimensional way of thinking, when people are saying, oh, you have to access, you have to just do this to access your fourth dimensional way of thinking. It's like they are right that in the fifth dimension, when you are a light being in the fifth dimension, in the literal fifth dimension, they think differently than human beings. Human beings think like monkeys. So if you can not think like your third dimensional body, because when I say third dimensional, I mean that there is 3 dimensions to the physical reality that we're living in. Like, instead of a flat circle, our planet is a round ball. Instead of us being flat pieces of paper, like a 2-dimensional object, we are 3-dimensional. We have depth, we have width, we have length. That's what I mean by third dimensional. Fourth dimensional and fifth dimensional, all the way up to 8th dimensional, like when I get into it, I literally mean literal dimensions. So, but like I said, when you're in these dimensions, I feel like you think differently in these dimensions. You are on a higher level of thinking. And if you can, quote unquote, embody that higher level of thinking right now, then you will technically be in a 5th dimensional way of thinking. But to be honest, I feel like since we're human, we should enjoy the 3rd dimensional way of thinking a little bit. And, just, I don't know. I feel like there's this weird thing with everyone trying to be right. Like, I don't give a shit if I'm right. Like, I don't care if I'm right. I don't care if I'm wrong. I don't care. That's not my concern. Right and wrong is a human perspective. Good and bad is a human perspective. Those are still, to get back to the way of thinking, that's a 3rd dimensional way of thinking. Good and bad, if you look at someone as good or bad, that's a 3rd dimensional way of thinking. Or, it's like a 5th dimensional way of thinking is knowing that there's no such thing. But that's why I kind of agree that there is some substance to people that say, you got to embody your 4th dimensional level of thinking or whatever. But my issue with the 4th dimensional way of thinking, it's almost like they switched just language. From fourth dimensional level of thinking to, it used to be Christ consciousness. Everyone wanted to get to their Christ consciousness. Now it's, you want to get to your fourth dimensional way of thinking. It's all the same thing. And it's like these spiritual ideas are being cycled around through the community. And honestly, I'm not trying to throw shots at religion or anyone in the world here, anyone's beliefs, but I honestly believe everyone's, bouncing around these ideas, and all the ideas come from the psychedelics. All of them. Every spiritual idea, I personally believe, every spiritual idea, and every religion, and every just spiritual anything, comes from the psychedelics. And it could be the endogenous psychedelics, because some people say, oh, well, you can meditate and do what psychedelics do. No, you can't. You cannot meditate and do what psychedelics do. You just can't. You can't. Because it's just like Terrence McKenna said, you don't find yourself shaking in your knees and scared before you go to meditate. No. But if you were about to go smoke DMT, like a breakthrough dose of DMT, then you know that, no, you'll be a little anxious, a little scared, because if not, then I feel like there's something wrong if you're not, I feel like. Because even me, every single time before I do DMT or any psychedelic or whatever, I am a little nervous, you get that weird, like, you just have to take a couple deep breaths before you do it type shit. And prepare for it and prep for it. You don't have to do that like you're prepping for war. Like you're prepping yourself, to possibly, go out at sea in the middle of a storm, in the middle of a hurricane or something like that. You don't do that preparing for meditation. It's a different... Because I feel like what psychedelics, and especially DMT, ayahuasca and smoked DMT, and mushrooms, because they're all tryptamines, I feel like they can take you to the tryptamine world, which I feel like is the spirit world. And I feel like in this spirit world, there's levels to it. What psychedelics can show you is there's levels to it. When you're trusting a book, that's all you got, is their limited experiences. There is no new experiences after a religion. And when you're tethered to a religion, you don't get to have any new ideas. You don't get to have any new revelations, and you don't get to have your own experiences. You don't get to have a spiritual experience, because if Jesus was alive today and was saying what he was saying back in the day, they would lock him up and put him in the psych ward. Because, same thing with Moses or anyone else who was having spiritual visions back then. You know what they do to people who have spiritual visions that did not do a psychedelic? They call them schizophrenic, and they put them in the psych ward. They put them on medication. They put them on antipsychotics. I'm all about just being real. So I do try to mix science with spirituality, but there is a religion that does that called Scientology. But I think they got it wrong too, I feel like, because they're tethered by old ideas. They're tethered by someone else's experience instead of direct contact yourself. You can read about someone else's experience about God, or you can have your own experience with God. I forgot who said that. I heard someone say that a long time ago. But I don't know. I just think that these spiritual ideas are just being fluctuated back and forth, and the words change, and it's just like old English. It's like just like our language changes over time. It's almost like these ideas are changing over time. The ideas are the same. They're all the same, but it's just there's slight different alterations because everyone's having... It's exactly what would happen, that exercise that I did when I was in school. I don't know if you guys did it, where you whisper something, you make a circle of people, and you whisper something in the ear of the person over here, and they whisper over to the person over there, and they whisper over here, over here, over here, until it gets back to you, and then it's a completely different thing than what you originally said. That's what I feel like is happening. And like I said, I'm sorry to say it, but I feel like it's happening because everyone's talking about psychedelic experiences, but not doing psychedelics. Like, I feel like I know this is kind of controversial to say, but I feel like every spiritual experience in the Bible has to, like, and everyone who had visions, basically, I feel like it has to be a psychedelic experience. If not, then they were schizophrenic. I'm sorry to say it, but that's just, we can't just look at everything and as it's, we can't just be children when we're grown. We can't just look at the world like a fairy tale. We have to put some foot down on the things, even though I can't prove psychedelics or like prove that's the spirit world. At least I can give someone DMT and be like, here's 70 milligrams of DMT, inhale the whole thing, hold it as long as you can, and then just go for the ride. Because at least I can give someone the experience. All someone in the spiritual community can do is give someone a video saying, these are the steps to open your third eye. These are the steps to reach a fourth dimensional way of thinking. These are the steps to reach a fifth dimensional way of thinking. It's like, but a lot of times I've heard like 3 people say this fourth dimensional way of thinking, it just sounds to me like Think and Grow Rich. Like the book Think and Grow Rich that was written in the early 1900s. And like all those, ever since then, those ideas have just been cycling around. The thoughts create reality, all of this and all of that. Like that's what people are saying with the fourth dimensional way of thinking. And I kind of get why some people are like, don't really like the new age spiritual movement. Like, I didn't really get it. I didn't really, like I said, I thought the New Age spiritual movement was like psychedelic people, but I found out, no, it's the, people with the crystals and with this and that. I'm not discrediting any of that, but I'm just saying there is some science to back some things up. And that there's been scientific research now that, they used to say that salt lamps produce negative ions. Well, come to find out that salt lamps do not produce negative ions because it doesn't have the right crystalline form. But there is another crystal that does when it's heated up. It actually does produce negative ions. So that's where like I'm trying to put a little bit of science behind my spirituality. Like if I'm gonna